chunks of fuselage that is flying around. And so you're supposed to wait 10 minutes so that for sure anything that's going to fall is fallen before you leave. So while I'm in there for the 10 minutes, I'm thinking to myself, well, my beloved wife Simone is probably worried about me. I'm out in the open walking. I will send her a WhatsApp text. I'm in a bomb shelter. I'm fine. Do I get a reply? No. Why do I not get a reply? Because she got so excited when she heard the alarm, she went into our safe room without her phone.
With my computer.
With her computer, right, but not her
My
phone.
phone was on the other side of the room. So
So,
I answered him after the.
yeah, by the time she answered me, I was home.
It's not far away from now.
Okay, but what do you do? I'm trying to talk about the emotion here. I want you to understand a little bit about what my last morning was like before we left. Now, this is unusual in Modin, but it's not unusual for Israelis. The normal is to live with this, various versions of it. What do you do after the Azakah? After you found the safe room? Now, we have a safe room in our apartment. In Reut, which is the fancy neighborhood, these houses were built, some of them before 1991, which means that they were built without safe rooms. That's why they were running to this place and why I could see them. Okay, so, all right now. I want you to get a little bit of the feel for this before we look at some of these texts. What does it actually feel like to be living with this? One other point of introduction. This is what I'm about to say is not a negative comment. You may have noticed, those of you who might have, neither Simone or I went to the commemoration yesterday. Who was there? And I am sure it was important and meaningful, but I couldn't bring myself to do it because it's still October 7th, 2023 to me. It's the 366th day today of October 7th, 2023. And it will be that if and until the hostages come home. And I knew that if we went, certainly I'm speaking for myself now, it was going to mean seeing lots of people we haven't seen for a lot of time, shaking hands, being nice, smiling. And I couldn't make myself do it. What I could do on Yom HaZikaron in Israel, that's the day before Independence Day. It's the day, Memorial Day for fallen soldiers. And there's 2 minutes of silence, which is what I think is the appropriate thing right now, because it's not over.
I just want to say we had a little piece of tape on it that said 366.
Well, yeah, that is something that some of the families started doing from day one, day two. And we have gotten to know one of the families from Nir Oz, which is maybe the hardest hit of all the kibbutzim, Be'eri, Nir Oz, and Parazek. Yeah, I mean, there's no contest here, but Nir Oz, many people died. About a third of the kibbutz was either killed or taken captive.
450 people on
450 people.
approximately.
Our congregation in Modin has adopted Nir Oz, not alone and not, I don't want to make it, but they're currently living in Karmei Gat, which is a suburb of Kiryat Gat, which is a kind of industrial city 30 miles from Gaza.
Yeah, 30 miles from us and 30 miles from Gaza.
That had apartments available. Our congregation came up with the money to buy all of the IKEA furniture to furnish the apartments and to help them move in.
And then we cleaned them.
And we cleaned them and we got them ready. And okay, all that's enough introduction. I can see by the looks on your faces that you're in the appropriate mood. So let's pass. And if there's not enough, Ellen was good enough to make a few. So what's here? Really, one of my great teachers at the Hartman Institute is the one who put this together. Her name is Rachel Korazin. And she's an Israeli who spent many, many years with the Jewish Agency in Israel, dealing with Israeli and diaspora Jewish education. And her thing is literature. You can find her online. She teaches classes all of the time online in both Hebrew and English. She's a terrific teacher. She's a terrific teacher. Almost everything I have to say here is not an original thought with me. It comes from something that I learned from her or from one of the other teachers. Okay, so this is a relatively simple poem to start with. Poem by somebody named Michael Zatz. And what it's called is Achizat Einayim. So Achizat Einayim literally means to hold your eyes. We would sort of call it sleight of hand. If I was looking for a similar kind of idiom, right? What is sleight of hand? The magician uses misdirection to cause you to look to concentrate, to look in one direction while he does whatever he does, or she does whatever she does. And so it appears like magic, which is why they call illusions. And it requires a kind of deftness and facility. So achizat einayim, holding your hands, holding of eyes. And what does she say? Madim. Ech hakol nireh zeh gam keshek klum. Lo nishar oto davar. All right, so now this is a really simple poem. It's amazing, he says, how everything looks unchanged, even when nothing remained the same. Now, think about that for a second. If you're an Israeli on October 8th, now I don't know if this was written on October 8th or October 10th or November 1st, but it's early in the process. And you are reeling from the reality of the worst day in Israel's history. The impact, I'm sure this was said over and over again last night at the memorial service. This is the worst day in Israel's history. It is worse than the beginning of Milchemet Yom Kippur, than the beginning of the Yom Kippur War, which, by the way, was the same time. One was Milchemet Yom Kippur, October 6th, which used to be considered the greatest fashla of Israeli history. Fashla is this wonderful Hebrew word which means roughly screw up. Right? If the fashel is to screw up, although sometimes it's translated with a little stronger word. So we used to think that October 6th was the worst screw up. How long did the Yom Kippur War last? 6-day war lasts 6 days. That one's easy. Who's buried in Grant's tomb? The 6-day war lasted 6 days. However, the Yom Kippur War, 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I remember it very, very well. We had just moved to Cincinnati. We had just gotten married and moved to Cincinnati. I was leading children's services at Rockdale Temple when we heard this, and we could not believe it. We thought it was an absolute disaster, and it went on for 3 weeks. This is after the 6-day war, not 366 days, 3 weeks. But imagine after the horror of the Yom Kippur War, which turned out all right, you're reeling, which he covers all this with the word amazing. And then he realized everything looks the same. How can it be that everything looks the same? Isn't everything different now? How can we go on? How is it possible? that everything looks the same. Now, maybe you had a little bit of this experience. I'm guessing New Yorkers had this experience on 9/11. I wasn't around for this, but I am guessing that Pearl Harbor created a similar kind of experience for Americans who were, wow, after that, how is it the same? I remember after 9/11, my mother saying to me, well, I guess nobody will ever fly in an airplane again. We were saying to her, that's ridiculous. You know, but what she was saying now, everything is different. We just can't possibly continue to live the same. That's what Michael is saying here. You can't possibly be the same. Everything looks the same, but we know that it isn't the same. In essence, he said he was alienated from everything around him. Have you ever had that feeling? Okay. Let's try one more of his poems, and then I'll stop and see what you guys have to say about it. So we learn a little bit about who Mikhail Zaks is. Veshuv margish kamo shahayiti yeled oleh. Once again, I feel like an immigrant child. This is something I can identify to. Is anybody here an immigrant? Have you been an immigrant? Sarah, have you been, what was it like when you, well, maybe when you went to Israel, you understood everything.
No. I was 10 years old when we moved to Israel, and I was in what's called an absorption center, which was for new immigrants, and actually was right before the Yom Kippur War, and it felt a lot longer than 3 weeks, I can tell you that.
I have no doubt.
And then I was in a general school once we moved out.
Yeah, that's their
and
favorite thing.
everyone around me-
Mainstream you right away at middle school.
So, math classes, geography classes, everything's grocery store, everybody's speaking Hebrew, and you just have to get by.
So we've been there for 9 years now as citizens. I still have this experience. So our Hebrew is not bad, but when we come back to the States, what amazes me is that I understand everything. It's actually disconcerting because when you're an immigrant in Israel, you can turn it off.
Yeah, you can just not pay attention.
If I don't concentrate, I'm not going to understand. So if I don't want to know what's going on, or if there's a bunch of side conversation, I just turn it off. And I can't do that here. But he feels like he's an ole again, like he's that 10-year-old Sarah. Ani oseh pnei mevin mehahen lahaskama menid rosh lishlila. I pretend that I understand. You ever seen that?
Yeah, oh
When I'm talking to an Israeli who thinks that they know English, and I say something that they don't understand, do they go, would you say that again in something different I don't understand? No, that would be admitting they didn't understand. So instead what they do is they go,
The eyes have a certain.
it's a
glaze.
certain, I know because I must have it myself in the reverse, but it's, what do? They pretend they understand, they nod their head in agreement, or they shake their head in disagreement. Aval kulam mistivi, everyone around me, midabrim safa acheret. They're speaking another language. What are they speaking? Okay, certainly at the most basic level, he's saying they're speaking Hebrew, and I was a new oleh, and I didn't understand it, but she'ani shuv lomed mechadash ivrit shel acharei hashiv'a ba'oktober. They're all speaking another language, one that I relearn again, the language of after October 7th. He's not talking about Hebrew. Who picked up the pun in Hebrew at the end? It's very difficult. I'm just curious to see if any picked it. What does he say? Shani shuv lomed mechadash ivrit shel acharei hashivah October. What's Shiva? You know what Shiva is. What's Shiva? One of the ways to say the 7th of October. It's actually not perfect Hebrew. But you can say B'Shiva on the 7th October. But what is he really saying? I'm learning the language of Shiva, in this October. And not only that, what's the other way to say 7th of October? שאני שוב לומד מחדש עברית של אחרי השביעי באוקטובר. I'm learning the language of after the 7th of October. What's Hashvi'i? What's Yom Hashvi'i? Yom Rishon, Sunday. Yom Sheni, Monday. Yom Shlishi, Yom Revi'i, Yom Chamishi, Thursday. Yom Shishi, Friday. Yom Shvi'i, Shabbat. And when did this happen?
Shabbat.
Shabbat. So he said, I am learning the new language of Shiva on Shabbat this October. Not Hebrew. But remember what he just said a minute ago about why isn't everything different? It's all different, but it looks the same. And in this poem, it's like he's continuing that thought and he's saying, what's different? What's different is we're all in Shiva. What's different is Shabbat.
Morning.
Oh, I'm sorry. Stop me if I say something that Shabbat. Simchat Torah. What does Simchat Torah mean?
Rejoicing with the Torah.
Rejoicing with the Torah. How do you rejoice with the Torah? How do you celebrate Shabbat when it's Shiva and it's still Shiva now, 366 days later?
Get mourn on Shabbat.
Not formally. So Joel is pointing out the halacha. Joel was always fond of pointing out the halacha in Torah study. He is a lawyer. I mean, you expect him to point out the halacha. And he's 100% correct. The formal processes of mourning, you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. Now, does that mean you turn off the emotion? Who's been through Shiva? Do you actually turn off the emotion? I'm mourning for whoever you're mourning. I will tell you who I am thinking about as we're sitting here in the library. I read the notice yesterday that Alex Schreiber died.
Yeah.
He sat right where you're sitting right now. I sat where Tina is. Almost every Saturday morning. You don't have to take my word for it. You can ask
I
Jill.
sat next to him. Why
Right.
should you take your word for it?
Almost every Saturday morning. All right. Now, on Shabbat, those who are mourning him, are they going to cease the feeling? No. It means that it means that the forms of mourning, sitting in the low chairs and all that kind of stuff, we don't do on Shabbat because Shabbat is Shabbat. But the feeling doesn't, and that's what I'm after here, is the feeling. What he is saying is, forevermore, Simchat Torah, forevermore, Shabbat, Yom Shvi'i, forevermore, they're going to be Shiva, they're going to be Shiva. I don't know what Simchat Torah is going to be like in Israel in a few days. We went through this on Purim. We're very friendly with all the rabbis. Of course, all of the rabbis of our synagogue think I'm the old man rabbi who knows all these things and they can come and talk to me about it. And once in a great while, I actually do know something that is helpful. Not always. But they debated, how are we going to do Purim? I don't know, did you have that debate here? This is an important understanding of one of the big differences between the diaspora and in Israel. This is visceral in Israel. People are laying on the ground with their hands over their heads in Israel. How do you do Purim? Ultimately, we did Purim as Purim, but a little subdued.
But we had a huge.
Huge
crowd.
turnout.
We couldn't be in the sanctuary. We had to be out on the pergola, the whole outside.
We have an
area.
outdoor space.
And it was cold. They had to turn on the heaters that are in there because, and lots of kids. And it was, I think there were more people than normally.
And why was that? So I am betting, I think Tina and Karen told me this, that there were more people at Rosh Hashanah services this year than the last 2 years. So the simple explanation, even in Beckley, West Virginia, we had more people. 30 people in Beckley, West Virginia were there for Erev Rosh Hashanah, including 7 kids. I don't know if you know what that's like. That's like 700 kids in Chicago. I mean, 7 kids in Beckley, West Virginia. There were 4 families with kids. And why was that? Well, the simple explanation is we're finally past COVID. Things are returning to normal. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. I think Jews want to be with each other. That's always true at the high holidays. Always escape me why the high holidays? Why not a Hanukkah or Purim or something else? But it was always true for Jews, but especially now, it's like we need to be with each other. Because it's not just the nonsense going on in Israel, it's the nonsense going on here.
But if you don't rejoice on Simchas Torah, aren't you granting another victory to Hamas?
Yeah.
So you really have to.
That was
No.
partially Purim too.
That was partially Purim. I agree with that. But you can't, you feel what you feel. You can't make yourself feel, you should love, it's the problem of the V'ahavta. V'ahavta Adonai. You will love Adonai your God. Really? You're telling me this is what I have to do? I'm going to love God? I have to feel like it? So what did the rabbi said? You have to behave like you love God. Okay, that I can understand. And that's exactly the same thing with Purim or with Simchat Torah. We'll have to behave like it's Simchat Torah. But if you're sensitive to this, are you actually going to feel it? It's the same, or are you going to be remembering all the people who were slaughtered and raped and dragged off into captivity, living in tunnels? If you call that living. Okay, so do we get the problem here with the language?
Yeah.
Fine. Who wants to add something to this? Is there a new language now?
I assume you're not talking about Aramaic.
No. I'm talking about
Kaddish.
a new emotional language after October 7, 2020. Do we have a new emotional language? Is a new emotional language developing?
I think there's a tremendous difference between feeling and perception in the States. I can't speak of other diaspora countries and Israel. It's simply not the same. As sympathetic and as knowledgeable as American Jews may make themselves about what happened, it's simply not the same.
I agree. I'm not sure that means, though, that American Jews cannot participate in this.
Oh, you can, but to say, do they have the same sense of alienation from what existed on Friday and now what exists on Sunday morning that the Israelis had? No. I think you had to be in the country, you had to feel the betrayal of the army, you had to feel the desperation. You have to be there. Maybe you're not an Israeli, but you had to be there to experience.
Do people understand what Teresa is saying? This is because the fashla, the screw up, was that Zionism itself came into question. What is Zionism at its root? Herzlian Zionism.
And ours.
No,
No.
that this is the safe place. This is the safe place for Jews. This is the place where we have power. This is the place where we have an army. The army will protect us. Maybe not perfectly. It's not like, but this, and when the army didn't show up, when the army refused to listen to the warnings that were coming up from if I can say this, Hebrew tatzpanitiot,
Tatzpanitiot.
who are these young ladies who sit on the border looking at screens, cameras, and radar and all the rest of that, who are kind of the early warning. The Hebrew means lookouts, roughly, lookouts. And they were sending up messages. There's stuff going on over there. They're getting ready to do something. Pay attention. And the higher ups didn't want to hear it. And this high-tech fence, Israelis love technology. As much as I dislike it, that's how much Israelis love technology. And they said, we built this high-tech fence. And they're not really interested in war. They're interested in whatever they're doing over there, and we're protected, and the whole fence was taken down with a tractor. The lowest tech kind of thing, 3,000 armed commandos and a tractor. And the fashla, the level of disappointment. Where is the army? That's what they are saying. At near Oz, the army never came. Not for hours.
14 hours.
Imagine what this meant. This would be like if we were invaded here and the army didn't show up. And especially in Israel where there's a dependency on the army. So the level here of disappointment that you're saying, I'm not sure that I don't have a better word.
I think his betrayal is correct. I mean,
Betrayal is,
I remember I spent the first 2 months watching Israeli TV on my computer for like 5 hours a day. And I remember this interview, I can't remember her name. She has a TV show, something like 60 Minutes. And she interviewed this Israeli officer, senior officer. It was at night on a road, it was strange. And she just looked at him and she kept saying, Eifu hait? Eifu hait? Where were you? Where were you? Where were you? And I heard just hundreds of interviews with people, and over, it's betrayal. It was our betrayal that the government didn't respond, that the military didn't respond, that the intelligence didn't respond. It was just this
and it was
betrayal.
a
The trust
loss
was
of,
broken.
it was a loss of confidence.
Mhm.
Well, if the movie Golda is at all accurate, it's just a repeat of the.
Oh, but much
Much
worse.
worse.
No
But
worse.
much worse. But where the army responded was slow, but ultimately responded. Here,
They were preparing. No, I put it the wrong way. But
so you wanted to say something?
It's not a language, but it's a way of feeling. I always, since it's happened, it's like I compare it to Amalek.
Amalek? Yeah,
Amalek, yeah.
yeah. Except, okay, so at some point we'll in the 4 weeks, we'll talk about other aspects of this. But in Israel, Hamas and Amalek would be identical.
That's what I feel, yeah.
And so the level of betrayal is number one. The level of incompetence, not just October 7th, 2023. This is the reality, what I'm going to tell you. Israel is still fighting its weakest enemy. Its weakest enemy. Hamas is its weakest enemy. Much weaker than Hezbollah. Obviously weaker than Iran. Israel is fighting, and by the way, the fighters have been unbelievably valiant. The army, when it finally engaged, but is fighting its weakest enemy to a stalemate. So the level of disappointment and lack of confidence. How do we rely on this? How do we go on? Should we stay in this country? How can we raise children here? I'm on purpose being bombastic because I want you to get a sense of the weight of the emotion. Let's go to the next page. Yes, to say the least.
And Americans, by the way, didn't feel it.
Well, not about Israel. I would argue if this was a different set of classes, American Jewish sense of vulnerability is the highest now than it's been in
Oh,
my
yeah.
lifetime.
Well, the anti-Semitism, but
Yeah.
it's not quite.
It's different, but it's
In
there.
terms
It's
of,
But they're,
dramatic.
but they're connected.
Yeah.
oh, yes, they are.
They're connected. Okay, so let's look at the next one. Different poet, Litel Kaplan. Do we know what the home front command is? Called Pikud HaOref. It's exactly what it is in English. Home front command is, you might have, the command in Europe, you might have the command in the Mediterranean, but there's a home front command that deals with the home front, the people at home, the non-soldiers, the citizens. So there's a home front command. Most of us have it on our phone. I have it deactivated right now, in which if there's an azaka or if there is some new instructions, it comes through on my phone from the home front command. This is what you should do. No gatherings more than 100 people. Don't go more than 30 feet from your safe room. Those kind of things, they all come through on the home front command. So what she is saying, we're still on the subject of language. And to save time, we'll read this in English, but we can look at the Hebrew if it seems to make a difference. She's talking about the language doesn't work anymore. So manishma is literally like saying, what's up? How are you? What's it? And so she's saying, no, that's canceled. You can't say what's up anymore. Instead, what do you have to say? What's shaken up? What's beaten up? What's blown up? In other words, when you see people on the street, you should say to them, what's blown up? That's more or less what's happening.
The Hebrew of this is very clever.
The Hebrew is very clever.
The Hebrew of this is manishmat, which is to destroy, to shake up. And then manishbar, what's broken, manishar. Do you hear the poetry though? Manishmat, manishbar, manishar. And then she says, what normally do we answer? We say, what's going on? Makore. What's happening? Wasn't there a TV show with that title? What's happening? Now, what's happening? She's saying, band, do not say that. You have to say the alternatives. What's breaking down? Makores. What's forever gone? Which literally means what's buried. Remember, they're trying to translate the meaning into English so that it's comprehensible. Okay, and then she says, the rude mashlomcha, which literally translates, how is your wholeness? How is your peace? It's the way you say, how are you? And she's saying, no, that's chatzuf. You know the word chutzpah? That's the same word. That's chutzpahdik, to say to somebody, how are you? I can tell you, we are asked this 100 times a day. And we ask it 100 times a day. And what do we say? Well, all things considered, I guess, okay. Hamatzav hazeh, beseder. We're okay, all things considered. But it's rude to say, how are you? So instead, and this is a play in Hebrew, you should frown in the face of your friend and ask, how are you? Ma milchamta, milchamtecha, instead of ma shlomcha. How is your war? And she's trying to play with the pun here. Not how are you, how are you? Right? So in Hebrew, you have shalom versus milchama. Here, instead of it's your well-being versus your war. Do we see
It
that?
also could be, what is your war? Like, what are
Yeah.
you dealing with? What are you?
Well, how are you?
Not
That's
just
true with
your
how
war, but
also.
like what is it that you're struggling with or fighting?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. That's why translation is always a
I
problem.
know, but I'm just saying it's a clever.
It's very clever.
And instead of the standard response, forbidden by strict veto power, you can't say, I'm fine, in fact. Can't really say I'm fine. Is anybody fine? Instead, what's required to be said, yesh lahashiv, Sarah will appreciate this, hakol b'sedek. Now, you know this in English, because it came into English from Yiddish. If you want to say everything's all right, you can say kol b'tzedek. Only we don't quite say it that clearly in English, we say kol b'tzedek. Right? Almost as if it was one word. This is entered English. Kol b'tzedek.
Copacetic is
All
in
right.
police jargon.
It's even police jargon. That's right. You even hear it on television sometimes in procedurals. But this is a play on the word. Instead of b'tzedek with a tzadi, it's b'tzedek with a samech, which means everything is a crack.
Crack.
So she translated it as everything's cracked. And if you're really truthful, if you're being honest, not covering anything up, not wearing a mask, then the truthful ones will answer Hakol Hamakbidim B'divrei Emet Yanu. The ones who are very punctilious in their answer will say Hakol B'shever. Everything is shattered. Hakol B'shever. Now, shever also, look at this. It was like tzedek becomes tzedek, becomes shever. They're all words that have a similar sound. And what she's trying to say is, if you're being real, when you're asked, how are you? You say, crappy. Everything's broken. That's how I feel. No, people don't do that. But it's a direct, if you even look, Hakol b'shever, everything is shattered. Sounds a little bit like Leil HaSeder, the night of the Seder. Right? In other words, she's playing on all these words where we know the word Seder, which is Hakol b'Seder, Hakol b'Tzedek, but she's saying use words that are similar sounding but have an entirely different meaning, the meaning that's real for how we feel now. Okay, by the way, the person who wrote this poem is a social worker. It was written shortly after October 7th. Look at number 4. This will not take us long, I don't think. But I want you to see what they're doing here. Asaf Gur is a journalist. Okay, and what does he say? You all know these words, right? Yitkadav v'yitkadav shemei Rabbi, which means what? How many times have you all said them? Several thousand? Means may God's name be. Leonard Cohen used them as a lyric in one of his songs, magnified, sanctified. That's where he got it from. He got it from Godish. Okay, that's what it means. May God's name be magnified and sanctified. But what is she saying? He's saying, no one came. Many thousands called him on that Shabbat morning, crying his name out loud, begging him with tears just to come. But he ceased from all his work. What do we say in Kiddush? No, in Kiddush we say Vayishbot mikol malachto asher asa. All the work that he had done on the acts of creation, God ceased from. So we're busy saying he ceased from all his work, but no God came. He wasn't busy. No God came and no God calmed. Only Satan celebrated and interrupted, dancing between kibbutzim and the slaughter festival. And our correspondent goes on to report, all the while sobbing, saying there is a burnt baby, and there is an abducted baby, and there is an orphan baby, and there is a day-old baby still linked to his mother's body by the umbilical cord. He hadn't even managed to find out his name. What will be inscribed on his tiny headstone? With a single date for birth and death. This is what the kibbutz looked like after Satan's visit. Turning the broadcast back to the studio. Quiet now, they are shooting. They are also launching rockets. And there is no government. There is no mercy. Just the screaming and the pictures that will never leave the mind. The 7th of October, 2023. What is Kaddish to him? It's a lie. It's a lie. We begged for God. Did God come? Who came?
Satan.
Satan. That's how they felt. That's how they do feel. This is very, very difficult here. I would love for some of the young people who are chanting from the river to the sea to at least get a feel for what these people were feeling on October 7th. What will be inscribed on the tiny headstone with a single date for birth and death? Okay.
Is the concept of Hester Panem so foreign to Israel that they don't get it or understand it, or
Esther Panim,
yeah, Hester, yeah, God hiding his face?
you've been listening to Nachum too long.
Thank you.
Esther Panim.
Didn't
No, I didn't know what you said. It sounded to me like, do you have a pan?
Well, that's because you've been over in Israel too long.
So what does everybody know what Joel is talking about?
No.
This notion that God's face is hidden. This is something that Elie Wiesel liked to talk about too. That during the Shoah, I hate the word Holocaust. Holocaust means burnt offering. And the 6 million were not an offering to anybody, certainly not to God. So as great a man and as great a writer as Elie Wiesel was, as great a Jew as he was, he did the world a disservice by teaching us to say the word Holocaust. Shoah means great disaster, and that is far more appropriate word. But Wiesel used to talk about in the Shoah, God's face was hidden. No one could see God's face. And he didn't create that concept. This is in Jewish thought. But it doesn't cover what we're talking about. That's an intellectual, rational kind of thought. What he's expressing, what's his name? Asaf Gur. What he's expressing here is what it felt like right then to be on the kibbutz and to see these children dead.
And he's doing it as a reporter, as if he's coming.
He was not living on the kibbutz.
No, he's a reporter.
On the next, Adi Blackman, Sofer, he writes a poem about Be'eri, which is one of the little kibbutzim that was completely overrun and destroyed. I gave you that one, right? Soon winter will be here, weeping clouds will water the earth. I think Sarah's the only one who's going to get this. Making red carpets grow. The anemone will flower first, yet no one will come to admire its beauty. The buttercup will bloom next, and there will be no festival. The poppy will flower last in silence, seen by none. The protected flowers had already been picked in the fall. So there's 3 things you need to know. Generally in Western literature, the poppy stands for fallen soldiers because it's red. It's blood. So number 1, traditional in Western culture, poppies, dead soldiers, dead people, blood. Number two, in the early years of Israel, Israel didn't qualify as a third world country. There was nothing. Okay, so the Israelis that were around, the refugees who became Israelis, who in the 30s and the 40s, and when they came, what did they have? They had wildflowers. They had wildflowers. And so unfortunately, they picked them. And they almost picked them into extinction. And so Israel passed a law, it was either right after the state
It was
or
early 50s.
early 50s, it's illegal to pick wildflowers. Still to this day.
And they bloom.
And when do they bloom?
In the winter and the early
They
spring.
bloom in the winter and in the spring. And in particular, the red flowers, those poppies, they bloom in the winter and they mostly bloom in the Negev, south of where we live.
The anemone.
So, the anemones, so much so that it's called Adom Darom,
Drom, Drom Adom.
Drom Adom, one of them or the other, means the red south. The red south. And people get in their cars and they drive for miles just to look at these big fields of the red poppies and the red anemones and the anemones or whatever the hell you say.
Say it in Hebrew.
It's much easier. It's much easier to say,
Yeah.
to say in Hebrew.
I have a picture of
Anyway, so that's number one. Poppies are dead soldiers, dead people. Israel protected wild flowers. Almost all of them were picked. Now it's illegal to pick them. And then there's this business, she called it the Ramadan.
Oh,
So,
she did?
yeah. So of the red south. And so look at it this way. What's going to happen? Winter will soon be here. And what will we have with the rain, the weeping clouds? We'll have red carpets again of flowers. Right? So we're going to have the kalanit, the anemone first. But who's going to be there to see it? Then we're going to have the buttercup. There's no festival. What is the festival she's returning to? The festival of going to see the flowers, but what was the festival? It was the Nova Festival where 350 were killed. The poppy will come last in silence. Nobody's going to be there to see it. The protected flowers. Who are the protected flowers?
the people.
Children. They've already been picked. They've been snatched. They're in Gaza. It all happened in the fall. Do one more, and then I want to see what people have to say. So you need a little background for number 6 also. Israelis, here's the illusion that everybody who grows up in Israel serves in the army. You want to know the truth?
Not everyone.
Not every.
It's a little over half. Once upon a time, that was, you were an Israeli citizen. If you were male, you gave 3 years to the army. If you're a female, 2 years, except 17 or 18% of the population are ultra-Orthodox who by and large don't serve. 20% of the population are Arabs who are not required to serve. There are many females who do alternative service or find a way not to serve at all. You add it all up and we're at 45%, something like that, who are not serving. But still, it is part of the culture that you serve in the army. And what's the goal of serving in the army? So the obvious goal is to defend the country. But there's a deeper goal.
Everybody shares in it.
Okay, that's important.
Patriotism.
When I was, and I know that this is going to be controversial probably with some people, But when I was about to receive my draft card, some of you may remember those days. My lottery number was 14, and I was in the first lottery. My father said to me, I served in World War II, so you would not have to. It was a common thing that he said. This was not unique to me. Israelis send their children to the army in the hopes that they won't have to send their grandchildren. This is a common thing. What's the song, Sarah? The Ani Maftiach Lach Yalda Ktana. I promise my young daughter that someday there won't be a war, and that this is the last war, and there won't be, and essentially you won't have to serve. We won't need the army the way we do now. That's ultimately what every generation thinks in Israel. This is it. We're doing what we have to do now so that we can change the reality, and this will not be the reality for the next generation. Everybody wants the next generation to have a better set of circumstances, a better life than the one they have, right? This is true here. It's true everywhere. I'm sure it's just human. Okay, so now keep this in mind. Mom said that when I grew up, there would be no army. Mom was right. I haven't yet grown up, and already there is no army. It wasn't there when I heard the screaming outside. It wasn't there when I saw Dad so scared and stressed. It wasn't there when the door was kicked in. It wasn't there when I hid under the bed. It wasn't there when we three pushed back on the door of the safe room. It wasn't there when time just stood still. It wasn't there when they suddenly entered. It wasn't there when they tore Dad off Mom. Mom had said that when I grew up, there would be no army. Mom was right. Now I want to tell her that she is always right. I cried, I screamed, and still she is silent. Because she's dead. What is Itai Lev saying?
Show up.
I'm sorry.
They didn't show up. The army wasn't there.
The army, it was like the betrayal, to use the term, of, yes, we were hoping that we wouldn't need an army, but we need it, and it wasn't there. Anybody want to say something about this before I have another comment or two?
I just want to know how the Netanyahu can still be in charge. I mean, maybe that's a little much to ask, but it just
It is.
it just seems.
It's not due to me. We're there almost every Saturday night protesting against the government, and a lot of good it does. There won't be elections for 2 years, but that's another story for another time. I will tell you another time. But
Is the war in Lebanon
there we go. That's what I was waiting for.
and an attempt for him to stay in power?
No, let's leave Netanyahu to another universe. But you're on the right track, Aaron, in my opinion. You don't need me to tell you that your thinking is correct or incorrect. What I'm saying is that this feeling about the army, of betrayal, was that there was a despair in Israel, that the thing that they needed most to protect them, to mix a metaphor, was missing in action. Actually missing in inaction. And it didn't happen. The confidence in Israel. Israel only exists in its neighborhood if it can deter its enemies. Now, maybe you agree with that, maybe you don't. I am absolutely convinced that Israel would not exist, certainly not for 75 76, almost 77 years, without its ability to deter its enemies. That's the neighborhood it's living in. Israelis, not just the enemies, but Israelis came to believe that they no longer could deter the enemy after October 7th. That's what he is saying here. You weren't there for this, you weren't there for this, you weren't there for this, you weren't there for this. Hour after hour after hour, you weren't there, you weren't there, you weren't there. You have no plans. Israel didn't invade Gaza for 3 weeks. Why didn't Israel invade Gaza for 3 weeks?
Did we do
I don't know.
They had no plan. Now, I want to turn to what Aaron said. What's happened in the last 3 weeks?
Escalation.
I'm sorry?
Escalation in the north.
Yeah, but let's look at that. How did that start? What was the big thing that happened?
Single thing?
You're talking about the pagers?
The pagers.
Mhm.
Okay, so this has never happened anywhere in war anytime, to my knowledge. They're certainly saying that in Israel and what I'm reading, which is somehow the supply chain was broken into. Here's the truth. The truth is Israel actually manufactured those pagers. They were able to convince through the supply chain that they were somebody else and that they were buying these pagers from that somebody else, whoever it was. I don't remember now that they thought. Taiwan, whoever it was, but it was actually Israel manufactured all those pagers.
That was Hungary. Somebody said it was
No, she
a
was the
Taiwan
broker.
company, but it
She was the
wasn't.
broker.
Oh, but
She was the broker.
That's how they made it look like it came from someplace else. Hungary, Taiwan, whatever it was. But
From
Israel
Taiwan to
actually,
Hungary.
Israel actually manufactured them. So this was planned for a very long time. In other words, they knew that these pagers were going to go into the hands of actual Hezbollah fighters or higher ups, the actual Hezbollah, not just Lebanese, and that they could cause them to explode at any time that they chose, Israel. Secondly, what happened next with the walkie-talkies, which was the same kind of thing. Okay. And what happened third? Killing Nasrallah, who I am not shedding a tear over. Yes?
Just say last week in an interview, Ronan Bergman? Ronan Bergman is an Israeli, he wrote Rise and Strike First. He's also a reporter for the New York Times. Anyway, he said the reason the Israelis moved, and he does a lot of military reporting, so I think he must have good connections. He's Israeli. He said the reason that the pagers went off when they went off is intelligence realized that
They were going to lose the opportunity.
No, they were blown. They were realized that it had been compromised,
Right,
the
that They were
operation,
going to lose the opportunity.
and they had to do it. They had to go then.
And I think that that's crap.
You don't think that's true?
I thought that at first. It's crap.
What do you think happened?
Okay, so the reason that was out there, look, there has never been, in my opinion, there has never been, nor could there be a worse government than the current government of the state of Israel. I want to be absolutely clear about where I stand on this. Absolutely clear. And so it appeared after the ineptitude in Gaza, and by the way, not the fighters, I want to emphasize this, the army on the ground, they actually acquitted themselves with great honor. But there is no overall strategy or plan in Gaza. So given that there was no overall strategy or plan, and then it appeared out of no place that these pagers went off, it looked as if, what the hell are they doing? That's what I thought. What are they doing? What's the point in this? Okay. It now looks to me, and by the way, this is not just my opinion, that it looks to me, though, that the army has had years to figure out what to do about Hezbollah. And this is actually part of a well-planned strategic operation that they knew what they were doing. In other words, we're going to do this first, we're going to do this second, we're going to do this third, then we are going to do these incursions. These are the launchers that we need to bomb. In other words, they put together intelligence, they put together a strategic plan. It was all in the drawer because everybody understood Gaza was the weakest enemy. Hezbollah is the one that's the real threat. And they actually had been planning and they knew what they were doing. And for the last 3 weeks, this is, I think, at least what Israelis are thinking. Whether it turns out to be true or not, we'll know eventually in the future. But Israelis are thinking, aha, this is our army. This is who we thought we always had. This is the army that saved the hostages at Entebbe. This is the army that after the surprise attack in 73 recouped and ultimately won the 73 war. This is really Tzahal. This is really our army. And so what's happened, as important as what's going on in Lebanon, has been a rebuilding of the confidence against despair in Israel about its own army.
Are you suggesting this is a confidence building?
No, I'm saying that is a byproduct. They are actually fighting a war against Hezbollah.
They're taking out, it was to take out the top echelon and the top middle echelon.
But for the last 12
And they
months,
were ready to do it.
Hezbollah's been really careful not to escalate. And according to
Oh, no,
even
they have
Israeli,
been escalating.
I'm just saying, well, over the last 12 months, though, they kept it, they didn't send soldiers in, they didn't cross the border, blow up. So they're blowing stuff up from above. And even as newspapers in Israel were reporting, Nasrallah got his nose really broken last time. And he'd even said in reporters, the border, and if I'd known this was going to be the reaction over
was
a
in
handful of
2006.
That
people.
was 2006.
Yeah.
That was
So,
18 years ago.
yeah.
There's also evidence that they were planning an invasion of.
Which, by the
3,000.
way, the Israeli army stopped on October 8th.
They were.
There's
planning-
now very good reporting and evidence that Hezbollah was planning the same thing up north that Hamas pulled off in the south. And that the Israeli army, though, was prepared up north and stopped it. And
That's
I
when
will
they
tell you
started
that
the
if you're living
bombardments.
in Kiryat Shmona, does anybody know where
They're
Kiryat
still
Shmona
living in
is?
Kiryat Shmona.
Nobody is living in
Nobody's there
Kiryat Shmona
now.
right now. It's in the finger of the Galilee. It's right across from Lebanon. It's a ghost town, and there are missiles hitting it every single day. One of my close friends, Rabbi Simcha Bab, his daughter lives in Haifa. 20 missiles in Haifa last night.
100 total.
The notion that there was a tit for tat that was going on is correct, but that sounds to American ears like this was just a skirmish up north.
No. I mean, I
There are whole
recognize
kibbutzim
they
that
had
are
90,000 people who can't get back and da 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 da.
There's 100,000 internal refugees from the north of Israel. The newspapers are reporting 60,000,
It's 100.
which is, it is 60,000. They're the ones the government made move.
There's another 40,000.
There's another, at least 40,000 of people who just said, we're not staying up here. And that they moved. 100,000, this is the first time that the security zone has been on the Israeli side of the border. Okay, so they knew that there was going to need to be a war with Hezbollah because it was unacceptable. I even feel, I consider myself more to the left and sort of not at all in the hawkish camp, but it is unacceptable to have more than 100,000 Israelis out of their homes, people displaced out of their cities, no plan for them. Imagine, we had 3 kids. Imagine the 5 of us living in a hotel room for a year.
God, no.
That's the norm. That's what's going on. And so there was going to be a demand that the Israeli army do something about this. What it turned out is, unlike this poem, they were ready to do something about it. Now, we'll see whether it goes too far. Personally, I'm not in favor of a land incursion. I understand these pinpoint strikes where some soldiers go in and come out, but if there turns out to be 1982 all over again, it'll end up the same quagmire that it was in 1982. And so, personally, I'm opposed to that. But I don't have all the same information that people who are making decisions. But I wanted you to see the contrast. This is October, November, December. Now we're talking about October 2024. And there's an attitude shift happening about Sahel as a result of its effectiveness in Lebanon.
What about Iran, the response?
That's a whole nother story. We'll have to talk about that in future times. Okay. All right. So what's the next thing that I gave you?
Yeah,
I'm sorry?
good.
Good day, number 7? No, it's- This is a study in impossibilities. Meaning she wishes she has control, but she doesn't have control. I want to manage all the war rooms, mobilize all the supply chains. I want to take care of all the children and all the single mothers and those who are gone. I want to turn myself into protective vests for all the fighters, become iron domes over the heads of all the girls, each and every one, to sustain all the families, the evacuated, the broken, the crushed, return those who were taken, bring back all that are gone. I want to collect all the donations and to take them where they belong, to pass all the messages, to make all the sandwiches, to oversee all the efforts. But on a good day, what's the word for good day in Hebrew? And what is a Yom Tov? A holiday. There's a pun going on here. But on a good day, I manage sometimes to breathe, sometimes to drink, sometimes to call loved ones. On a good day, I manage sometimes to cry. What's the good day she's thinking about? Simchat Torah. The holiday, a good day. She's saying, I really want to do all these things. All I can manage to do is to cry. Sometimes I can take a drink. Have you ever had this experience? If you're in deep mourning, can't eat or drink anything. At least that was my experience. Joel?
It just is, it's a Yom, Simchas Torah is not a Yom Tov.
Sure it is.
It is?
Oh,
Absolutely.
Why, it's after Sukkot?
Especially for Reform Jews, because it's Shmini Atzeret,
Well, I know Shmini Atzeret is the last day.
which is a Yom Tov. And that's
Okay.
Simchat Torah.
Simchas Torah is the next
But
day.
Simchat
No.
Torah is
Oh, for
Only
Reform
in the
Jews.
diaspora.
But in Israel. it's
Only in the
same.
diaspora. In Israel, there are no extra days. That's all diaspora nonsense. I was going to use another word.
But she's also making a comment about Israeli society, about everything that happened that the government did not do. And she wants to be part of it and can't bring herself even to get out of her door, out to do it. Because all of these things are the things that actually happened.
That's right. So we've all seen this before. We're beating a dead horse now. Let's look at number 9.
Number 8.
Did I give you number 8?
We don't have number 8.
No, I didn't give you number 8 on purpose.
Yeah, it's not the end.
I skipped number 8. Let's look at number 9. This is by somebody named Dael Rodriguez Garcia. Very Israeli name. Okay. What are the 2 most dreaded words in Hebrew right now on the news? They're the first 2 words there in the Hebrew if you want to read it. Hutar lepirsum, which means cleared for publication. What is cleared for publication? When they discover bodies, when somebody is killed, when a soldier is killed, Israel takes pains not to let it become public until the family is notified. And once the family is notified and any other questions that need to be answered are answered, then
And they give permission.
the government, the military censor, gives permission for publication. Hutar lepirsum. So the last thing you want to hear if you have a kid in the military are the words, it's cleared for publication. It probably means you're going to find out your kid was injured or killed. Okay, so that's what's underneath this. These are not just randomly chosen words. These are words that everybody knows what they really mean. Cleared for publication. What's cleared? That our hearts are broken and in hidden places and empty rooms, thousands of sobs are choking silently. Cleared for publication. That open season was declared on us. We were plundered in the dark of the most precious of the precious. It is already cleared for publication that the magical shining light of our beloved's face is extinguished. However, beneath the same soil, a stubborn plant is sprouting, sending roots without end, tightly grasped with love. What do you think? Sounds a hopeful note at the end. It's all been cleared for publication what the disaster was. But beneath the soil, there's a stubborn plant. Who's that? Anybody ever called Jews stubborn? Sending roots without end, tightly grasped with love. We're not dead yet. Yeah.
Okay, this is gonna sound kind of awful, I guess, but, and I get this, but would the people of Gaza kind of feel the same way? That there are roots without end, and that what happened is that Hamas, because of what happened, will grow from the roots of the people that have died?
I'm not sure. I don't know what they're thinking.
Not necessarily with the poem, but it just seems like with everything that's happened over there and,
Tom Friedman thinks, and he's thought from the very beginning, that the day after this is over, and after they do what they do, which will be to declare victory because they survived, the people of Gaza will realize just what Hamas has done to them and will
I hope,
behave accordingly. I don't know if he's right or wrong, or not.
I hope that's good.
Do you, out of all of this and the failure of the army, is there anything within Israeli society growing for a two-state solution? I know Netanyahu says never, and probably the Haredi say never as well, but
No, the Haredi they don't care about a two-state solution. The Haredi are not the problem. It's the national religious, which we're going to talk about the next session. Next session, 2 weeks. All right, but the answer simply to your question is Israel is divided 50-50. Does this sound like a country that you know? In terms of half the country has one point of view and half the country has another point of view, and it's at loggerheads. That's the simple short answer. It's obviously much, much more complicated. So yes, there are plenty of people who think that way, but they're not in charge right now.
Are there any poets, Israel, that are uplifting at all, or is
Poets?
everything? Well, yeah, ones who write poetry, poets.
What I'm trying to get across, Joel, is sure there are, but not now. Not now. That's like asking, do you remember what happened with comedians after 9/11? They stopped doing comedy. Why did they stop doing comedy?
Nobody was in the mood to laugh.
Exactly. Exactly. Okay. That's a good number.
Can I
Yeah.
just, three of us in this room were in Israel, well, you know, when we went there in February, was it February of 23? And we went to a kibbutz, Kfar Aza.
Yep.
And after we went through the whole thing where she showed us the ways that they sent
Yes, I
over
met her. Her
bombs.
name was Chen.
Yeah, yeah. Her final words was that she felt, but correct me if you heard it differently, that somewhere over on the other side are mothers who don't want to have their children killed either.
I'm sure she might. I heard her in July.
Did you?
I went to Faraza with a group and she happened to be the person who was there. I only found out a couple days ago that she's the person who you heard. She tells a different kind of story now.
Yeah.
She
So
tells the
sad.
kind of story of how they destroyed her kibbutz and almost killed her sister. And if it hadn't been for a TV reporter who could get to her husband, who was an IDF officer, her sister would have died, how her aunt died, how they overran her kibbutz. They broke into the armory, took all of their weapons and used their own weapons against them.
And she was in Portugal.
She was in Portugal when it happened. Okay. Let's look at number 10. Same poet. A soldier is falling like a coin into a tzedakah box. He bumps into the copper coins. Secretly, he falls anonymously. He saves from death. He rattles with his brothers. He kisses their faces, rusty with the sweat of battle. And his father and mother are stretching out their hands, begging to bring him back through the narrow slit.
Wow.
A soldier is falling like a coin into a tzedakah box. Why do we put coins in a tzedakah box?
Charity.
Tzedakah is supposed to save us. What happens? What are we going to say? You already said it once because you did the Unatan Tokef on Rosh Hashanah morning. Those of you that were here on Rosh Hashanah morning. How does the Unatan Tokef end? Who shall live, who shall die? It ends with Utfilah, prayer. Utshuva. Utzedakah. Ma'avirin et roa hagezerah. Tzedakah saves us. A soldier falling like a coin into a tzedakah box. The soldier is supposed to save us. He bumps around in there. He's with his brothers. He gets dirty and rusty from sweat of the battle. But what do his father and mother want? They want to pull him back out of the box. When we lived in Israel in 1989, our oldest son was 11, our daughter was 8, our youngest son was 3-year-old. He just did wherever we took him. But the older two, they wanted us to stay. Of course, we didn't have really a way of making a living, but I said to them, if only my congregation in Lancaster, Pennsylvania will continue depositing the checks, we'll be happy to stay. But we were on sabbatical. But in truth, there was a piece of me that said, can I make a decision that my children will have to bear the brunt of? Can we take these American kids? Sarah, you must be able to identify with this, and move to Israel permanently, where they will be in the army. They will be in the box. Now, in this poem, every Israeli is thinking that. Okay. Well, do I have one more in this collection? Maybe not.
11.
Okay,
You have one more.
one more. And then I have something entirely different. In the evacuees hotel by the Dead Sea, remember that's where they took the survivors, many of them. She carefully gathers the doll's hair with a ribbon. She attaches a sparkling pipe cleaner to the ribbon. And then she asks, tell me, am I alive? And how would they know if I were dead? And what would you say to a 4-year-old girl? Only the living can hug. Come, let's hug and see if we're alive. Later, she says, tomorrow morning, let's check again. 4-year-old little girl
Okay.
playing with her doll. How do we know we're alive, Mommy? I can't imagine my kids asking that.
Yeah.
We have our youngest grandchild is 4 right now.
Please,
He's 5.
fine.
Just turned 5. I can imagine him crashing into the living room coffee table and knocking everything over and saying, I didn't mean it. That's mostly what he does, is crash into it.
Yeah.
He would make a very good bulldozer driver when he was old enough. But can you imagine a 4-year-old saying, Mommy, how do we know we're alive? That's how real the death is to them. You better check again tomorrow. Okay. Let's look at something now for something entirely different. It should say page 4 at the bottom. Okay, so if you want to look at a traditional text, and those of you that know me know that if I could, I was going to find some traditional text to bring into this. The thing that the rabbis dealt with, which would have produced the same kind of emotional, overwhelming reaction, was the destruction of the temple. Just imagine what that meant to them 2,000 years ago. The entire religious structure was based on a temple with priests and mostly animal sacrifices.
And the ark.
Hmm?
The ark of the covenant.
I'm still not
Have
here.
the ark.
Oh, the ark. But for the average people, nobody sees the ark but the high priest on Yom Kippur. So the ark is not the center of things, even though it is the center of things, but it's the center of things is the show going on in the temple. And then it's gone. No more temple, no more priests, no more sacrifices. The disruption had to have been gargantuan. So there had to have been Jews who had different reactions. Like one of the reactions had to be, oh, we can't stop this. We got to find a way to keep it going. For all I know, they were making sacrifices in their backyards. You know, I mean, there had to have been people who said, we're going to keep these going. Then there had to be people who said, no, we're going to figure out something new, and they put all their energy into that. And then there had to be the people who just wanted to sit down and cry. Right? You know, people like that. You have all these kinds of reactions to disaster. When the temple was destroyed a second time, right? That's the big destruction. Not Solomon's temple, but Herod's temple. It's called Bayit Hasheni, the second temple. There was an increase in the number of ascetics among the Jews. What is ascetics? What are ascetics? People who are essentially sitting down and crying. In other words, woe is me.
They completely retreat from the
They
world.
retreat from reality, right?
from the-
So what was their
any
practice? I'm not going to eat meat. I'm not going to drink wine. Now that's not an accident. In Jewish life, what makes for a festive meal? It is not simply eating as much as you can till you explode. That's what Americans think. A festive meal has meat, wine, and then eventually sweets. So there are people who do not fast on the 9th of Av, but they don't eat meat, they don't drink wine, they don't eat sweets. You follow that? Okay. So they're saying, no more meat, no more wine. But Rabbi Yehoshua joined them and he said to them, my children, for what reason do you not eat meat or do not drink wine? And they said to him, shall we eat meat from which offerings are sacrificed upon the altar, and now the altar has ceased to exist? Shall we drink wine which is poured as a libation upon the altar, and now the altar has ceased to exist? How can we drink wine or eat meat when the temple is gone? How can we enjoy meat, enjoy wine, when we're living in ruins, when we can't make the offerings, when our lives are destroyed?
That's how the meat was
Yeah, that's how
allowed
you
for-
got meat.
You gave some
You took to the temple, the priest got his cut, the Levites got their cut, and you took the rest home,
and that was yours.
unless it was a burnt offering.
Same with wine.
Yeah. So Rabbi Yehoshua says to them, oh, I understand your point of view. He must have been a Rogerian therapist. I understand your point of view. If so, we will not eat bread either, since the meal offerings that were offered upon the altar have ceased too. Right? You're not going to eat meat because there's no temple. If you're not going to drink wine because there's no temple, you better not eat bread either. And they replied, you are correct. It is possible to subsist with produce. We'll live on vegetables, fruits and vegetables. He said to them, you will not live on vegetables either, since the bringing of the first fruits has ceased, right? On Shavuot, you have to bring the first fruits, everything that grows. And we can't do that anymore. And they replied, you are correct. We will no longer eat the produce of the 7 species from which the first fruits were brought, as it is possible to subsist on other produce. Okay, we won't eat the grains, we won't eat the dates, we won't eat the 7 things that you had to bring on the first fruit, so we'll find other things to eat. And so what does he say to them now? If so, you will not drink water, since the water libation has ceased. And they were silent, as they realized they could not survive without water. Rabbi Yehoshua said to them, my children, come and I will tell you how we should act. To not mourn at all is impossible, as the decree was already issued, and the temple has been destroyed. But to mourn excessively, as you are doing, is also impossible, as the sages do not issue a decree upon the public unless a majority of the public is able to abide it. Rabbi Yehoshua continued, rather this is what the sages said. A person may plaster his house with plaster, but he must leave over a small amount in it without plaster to remember the destruction of the temple. Rabbi Yehoshua continued, the sages said that a person may prepare all that he needs for a meal, but he must leave out a small item to remember the destruction of the temple. Rabbi Yehoshua continued, the sages said that a woman may engage in all of her cosmetic treatments and see what they thought about women, but she must leave out a small matter to remember the destruction of the temple. As it is stated, if I forget you, Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its cunning, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. If I remember you not, if I set not Jerusalem above my highest joy. What is Yehoshua saying to them?
You have to go on living.
You have to go on living. And this business of sitting and crying and mourning forever and refusing to eat and refusing to drink because the temple is gone, you're behaving like children. Enough is enough. What you have to do is never forget. Now, I know that became a slogan. So by accident, this is true in our condo. Some of you have been in our place. There is one corner at the top of the steps where the guy who redid our condo did not finish the plastering. And he said to me, we could arrange to get this finished. It's sort of rough there. But I knew this passage. I said, no, I think we should leave that corner the way it is. What is the most famous example of this that you all know? If you were married in a Jewish ceremony, how did the ceremony end?
Breaking the glass.
So I like breaking the glass, and I explained this when I did these ceremonies. Happily, I don't do them anymore, but when I did these ceremonies, I explained, and it makes a terrific end to the ceremony, and that's why we should do it. Mazel tov, right? Okay. And there's other explanations. I had a whole little spiel. I won't bore you. But what does the tradition say?
Rise to destruction.
You're supposed to, even in this moment of great joy, the joyous moment of your life, when you're getting married, you're supposed to remember the destruction of the temple. Because there is no joy without the sadness. You have to remember. You can't forget. This was terrible. Okay. I think that this story is completely applicable to October 7th. It's completely applicable. That we can't forget. But just like one of the poems alluded to before, we have to go on living. We have to let the roots sprout again. The red flowers are going to come up. We have to go look at them. Sure, we have to go to the kibbutzim and see what happened there. You know, there's a very big debate right now, literally right now, about what should happen with those kibbutzim. So the people of Nir Oz, there was a very long story in the forwards. If any of you want to see, for some reason I get the forwards. I get an email almost every day from the forward, which we're not subscribers. I do not know why I get it, but I do know, and I'm sure they got the CCAR list of Reform rabbis and they're sending it to everybody. But the people from Nir Oz are trying to decide what to do. There is a group that wants to continue to be a kibbutz. It was unbelievable. When they were moved, first they were moved to Eilat, to a hotel in Eilat. And then, as I said, they were moved to outside of Kiryat Gat, to Karmei Gat, and we set up all their apartments for them. You know what their big concern was? They were very grateful. Really, they were very, very sincerely, genuinely grateful, but they wanted to know what room they could use for their Chadar Ochel. Now, think about this. You know what a Chadar Ochel is? You know what the communal dining room.
No.
They're living in a high-rise apartment building now, but they wanted to stay a kibbutz.
Yeah.
And you can't have a kibbutz without a communal room, even if you don't all eat together in it anymore. Although Nir Oz is a Hashomer Hatzayir kibbutz, which is like as radical a kibbutz as there ever was in terms of being as kibbutzy as you can get as a kibbutz.
They've just gotten rid of the children's houses.
Yeah.
They still had some for some of the kids.
Okay, and so they wanted a Chadar Ochel in their building. What are we going to do? All right, so there's some of them that are saying we should go back and rebuild. And that's what the government wants them to do, because they want these communities on the border. This has always been part of Israel's defense strategy. Others are saying, are you kidding? If I go back there, every place I look, I'm going to see blood. Every place I look, I'm going to see somebody who is my friend who is dead, or my cousin who is dead, or some field that they gave their life to, which is now nothing. We can't go there, but we want to stay at kibbutz, so they want to go to some place called Beit Nir, which is about 30 miles further into the Negev, towards Beersheba. Oh, so they would not be right on the border. But the government doesn't want them to do that, and there's no money for that. So, of course, their solution is, we'll go to the United States and raise the money. Israelis have this notion that every one of you sitting here is a multimillionaire, and you're just waiting to give that money to them. That's a pretty much standard Israeli kind of thinking. It's remarkably sad.
And you're not an example that doesn't happen?
We spend our lives trying to explain America to Israelis and Israelis to Americans. That's true. Because really Americans don't understand Israelis and Israelis do not understand Americans. Anyhow, we sort of have a foot in both worlds. And anyhow, there's a third group that just doesn't want to do kibbutz stuff anymore. They don't want to go back. Okay. In other words, it's a very big debate. What do we do next? How do we go on? That's why I think this story is relevant. What it says to you is, we're not going to tell you what you should decide. We are going to tell you, you have to decide. That you can't just sit and say, I'm not going to eat meat and wine, and I'm not going to have produce, and I'm not going to have bread, and I'll try to get along without water too. That's the one option you don't have. And so I think that this rabbinic story, and it comes from the Babylonian Talmud, Baba Batra 60b, if you want to check with Nachum on this, Bill. Is
Side 2.
it's on the second side of the page, is that it's there as an example to us that ultimately Judaism did not die with the destruction of the temple. Indeed, we became something even better, rabbinic Judaism. And that's sort of my prayer, that if I have a prayer, is that Israel doesn't die as a result of this horrible time. And it's fervently my prayer that 5785 is a whole lot better than 5784. But maybe something good will come from it that we can't see yet. They couldn't see what was going to come. And now, there's a weird passage that I want to give you as the last one. We still have 10 minutes, guys, so we can do it. I was wrong. We are filling up. Anyway. So it's number 5 there on page 6. Do you see it? Leora Ayalon? It says page 6 at the bottom, and it's number 5.
No, we have 4 to 7.
You have it. You just only have it in English on page 7. I'm sorry. I didn't copy the Hebrew for you. I didn't think people were going to want to read this in Hebrew, so I didn't copy the Hebrew. The reason I'm looking at it on page 6 is, who is Leora Ayalon? She's from Kfar Aza, where you were. No, I know I didn't copy the Hebrew. If you turn the page, yes, there's English where it says there was a woman who was Rabban Gamliel's neighbor.
Oh, exactly.
So Leora Ayalon is from Kfar Aza, and she wants to express the feeling that we've been talking about now for an hour and 40 minutes, but she wants to express it in a positive light. And what is so fascinating is she does this by putting a new spin on this horrible rabbinic text. It's just a terrible, terrible rabbinic text. So what is the rabbinic text? It's on page 7 where it says there was a woman. Did everybody follow it? Okay. It's about Rabban Gamliel. Who is Rabban Gamliel? He is the head of the Rabbinic Academy. We're talking about a biggie here. This is probably Gamliel II, not Gamliel the elder. There was a woman who was Rabban Gamliel's neighbor, whose son died, and she would cry for him at night. Rabban Gamliel heard her voice and cried along with her until his eyelashes fell out. In other words, Rabban Gamliel was so empathetic listening to this person crying that he would cry right along with her. And not just a little boo-hoo. He was really crying to the point that literally his eyelashes were falling out with the tears. The next day, his students took note that their beloved teacher was so distressed, and they removed her from the neighborhood. Told you it was a horrible passage.
Yeah.
His students care more about Rabban Gamliel's distress over this poor woman than the poor woman who lost her son and is in mourning. And so what is their solution? Well, let's get rid of the woman. Right? So they get rid of the woman. They get rid of the woman. Okay. Rabban Gamliel was fulfilling what was written. Cry, she will cry at night. So why did they remove her from the neighborhood? In other words, he was being a good Jew. And why did they remove her? His students said, because his eyelashes fell out. This is unacceptable. And it was because he was crying alone. His neighbors did not hear him crying, did not cry along with him. For that neighbor who lost her child, that is why we removed her from the neighborhood. Do you notice what she did in her midrash on the passage? Look at that again. They didn't get rid of her because she was upsetting their teacher, and so they needed to remove her. They got rid of her because he was crying alone. Nobody was paying attention to him, who should have also been crying along with her for her dead child. So the students send her away so that other people can join with their teacher in crying for her. Because she, in their eyes, was like Abraham our father, of whom is said. What was Abraham our father like? Like an amphora. You know what an amphora is? That is one of those jars that the Romans carried stuff in that's sort of pointed at the bottom. So there would be liquids in them and grain and stuff. So she was like a storage jar of persimmon fragrance, sealed shut by a tight cord, laid aside in a corner whose scent does not carry. But when it is stirred, the scent diffuses. Thus the Holy One, blessed be God, said to Abraham, our father, move yourself from place to place and your name will grow great in the world. Lech lecha. So in other words, what did God say to Abraham? You have to go tell everybody who I am. Lech lecha, me'eretz lecha. Get out of your land and go to where I'm telling you so you can spread the word. Abraham was the first proselytizer. Remember that the next time somebody knocks on your door. According to this midrash and many midrashim, that's what Abraham was doing. The students sought to remove her out of the neighborhood so that she would be like Abraham. She would stir about in the world, going from one neighborhood to another, crying for her son, and her voice would be like a shofar that sounds from one end of the earth to the other, calling out, cry, you will cry in the night, for you are the community of Israel. And so Rabban Gamliel will not cry alone for her in the night, but the people of his community and all the communities will cry along with them. And through the sorrow will diminish a little in the world. It should say through them. And since she stirred about in their neighborhoods, the people cried along with her, and her tears cleansed their souls. And so her mind eased a little, and she found some respite for her soul. This is going to be in this book here. You want to see it?
The shooting has been.
Yeah. Okay, now, but this is volume 2. Okay, so what is this woman doing? This woman from Kfar Aza, her kibbutz was destroyed. I don't know if her son was killed, but she knew plenty of people whose child was killed. And they're crying. And there's this horrible story of the students of the empathetic rabbi who get rid of her because they're disturbing their rabbi. And instead they say, no, this was a good thing that the students did because they understood that she needed to go out into the world to cry so that the world would cry with her. And what happens when the world cries with her? Then it's easier. Now there's real truth in this. I don't know if any of you have been depressed or have been sad to the point that there is something to being able to share these kinds of burdens, these kinds of weights that makes it more bearable. That's why I wanted to teach this poetry, even though I don't teach poetry. I don't even read poetry. But the idea here is we have to share this sorrow because that's the only way it's going to be bearable. We have to share it out into the Jewish community of the world, and as far as I'm concerned, beyond the Jewish world of the community. And this is really a very difficult thing to do. So I thought it was a good kind of thing to end with, this notion that even the greatest sorrow is more bearable when it is shared. And that through a very clever reading of a very problematic passage, she comes to teach all of this out of her own experience coming from Kfar Aza. Who wants to say something? You're all dumbfounded?
Thank you. It's hard to hear, but
It's very hard to hear. It's very hard to hear, and I appreciate the fact that you wanted to hear it, because I think we were upfront in terms of the titles of each section of what I wanted to talk about. Next time is entirely different. Because I want to talk about who are the religious Zionists. Who is Bitzalel Smotrich? With that name that sounds like a Dickinson character. Bitzalel Smotrich. We'll talk a little bit about Itamar Ben Gvir, who also has a Dickinsonian Dickinson's kind of name also. Who are these people that are now in the highest echelons of Israeli government? What is the kind of thinking? Who are the rabbis that are teaching them? Who are these modern religious Zionist rabbis? What are the unique things that they are teaching that are motivating these people who, in my view, are so problematic to the Israeli enterprise? And I think that you want to know who they are and what they're about and why they are about this. It will help you understand a little better what is going on. Okay, so next week we're off. Next week we're off because we'll be in Pennsylvania. The week after that, we'll be back. Okay, thank you very much for
Thank
coming
you.
and
Thank you.
suffering through this.
Thank you.
Would you help me do something? Sure. I want to empty those into the plants. So would you carry one out?
The sacred stitching group.
Well, as citizens.
Ah, yes,
it's
yes.
amazing.
And I'll bring them back in.
Nope, they're here. That's why we're back. We come back in the fall and the spring because all our kids are.